Mark chapter 4, verses 1 through 8. Again he began to teach beside the sea. Such a very large crowd gathered around him that he got into the boat on the sea and sat there, while the whole crowd was beside the sea on the land. He began to teach them many things in parables, and in his teaching he said to them, "Listen, the sower went out to sow, and as he sowed, some seeds fell on the ground, where they did not have much soil, and it sprang up quickly, since it had no depth of soil. And when the sun rose, it was scorched, and since it had no root, it withered away. Other seed fell among thorns, and the thorns grew up and choked it, and it yielded no grain. Other seed fell on the good soil, and brought forth grain, growing up and increasing and yielding 30, 60, and 100-fold. Mark chapter 4, 13 through 20. And he said to them, "Do you not understand this parable? Then how will you understand all the parables? The sower sows the word. These are the ones on the path where the word is sown. When they hear, Satan immediately comes and takes away the word that is sown in them. And these are the ones sown on rocky ground. And when they hear the word, they immediately receive it with joy. But they have no root and endure only for a while. And then when trouble or persecution arises on account of the word, immediately they fall away. And others are those sown among the thorns. These are the ones who hear the word, but the cares of the world and the lure of wealth and the desire for other things come in and choke the word, and it yields nothing. And these are the ones sown on good soil. They hear the word and accept it and bear fruit 30 and 60 and 100-fold."
So let us pray together. God of life, by the power of your Spirit, come to us now. Plough our hearts with your living word, until we who are broken become fertile with your love. For we long to bear fruit in a world that is wasting. Amen. Well, in California, we have a lot of clear, blue, sunny skies in the summer. There's not many days when it looks like this, with fluffy clouds. But as a child in England, though, summer days often had clouds like this. And one of the things that my brothers and I enjoyed doing was lying down, looking up at the clouds to see what objects or characters or pictures we could find there. There wasn't no right answer. We had the freedom to be as creative as we could. But when we look at paintings, we're not usually given that same creative freedom to see anything we like. We ask, what's it a picture of? What did the artist paint? What does he want us to see? And if the artist tells us what's in it, then that's all we ever see. Explanations box us in. They suppress our creativity. Good art evokes our mind and our emotions. Jesus used parables, stories, to teach his disciples, and by extension us. But he left us to struggle, because parables don't have just one meaning. They turn our thinking upside down. They have to be experienced rather than studied and interpreted. Today's scripture that we just heard was, of course, a parable, a farming parable. And in this case, Jesus offers us some clues as to its meaning. But let's be careful not to get too locked in to his literal words. And remember that parables are deeper than that. So when we listen to a parable like this, we put ourselves in various places, in this case as the different kinds of soil. We treat it as an allegory. The different types of soil represent different types of people. We internalize the story, and we all want to be the good soil where the seeds take root. But that can then cause us to pass judgment on others not being as good as us. Or it can cause us to think that we're the rocks or the thorns, and we feel bad about ourselves, that we'll never be good enough. Being realistic though, sometimes we are the good soil and sometimes we are the bad soil. But where do we go with that information? How does a path or rocky ground become good soil? Parable leaves me at least a little bit stuck. So let's think some more. Perhaps there's another perspective. Why did Jesus call this the parable of the sower, or the parable of the farmer? What insights can we experience? Where's the surprise, the twist in the parable? Seed never does well planted on rocks and paths and thorns. That's no great surprise. I think the surprise in the story was that the farmer sowed his seeds on the paths and the rocks and amongst the thorns. Farmers aren't rich. To poor people, seeds are a valuable commodity. Recklessly throwing seeds everywhere is not a wise choice. There's a lot of wasted seed and money. The sower is behaving as though what is precious is in unlimited supply. What's he thinking? We think of responsible stewardship as guarding our money, guarding our gifts. So if God's the farmer, what does the parable tell us about God? What is God doing? God is extravagantly, with exuberant generosity, distributing the seeds. God's not making any judgment about whose those seeds are going to take root in. God does it anyway. God doesn't judge what the results might be. And what about if instead of thinking of ourselves as the soil, we think about ourselves as the farmer sowing the seeds? I think this parable is telling us to be extravagant sowers with those faith seeds, to do it anyway. Can you tell just by looking at someone how they're going to respond? You never know. You are here, each one of you, because someone was reckless enough to scatter and throw seed to you. If we don't waste seeds, then there are some people that we won't reach. 20 plus years ago, at the church that Adrian and I were attending in the United Kingdom, we were involved in a prison ministry. The church was near an open prison where men were sentenced to life sentences, where they served out the last couple of years of that sentence. These would have been very serious crimes that these men committed. And as you can imagine, that made most of them middle-aged. An open prison in England is one without high walls, where they're being rehabilitated to re-enter the community. One of the initiatives was to give the prisoners day release passes and to place them in jobs in the local community. And we lived in a market town with a Saturday market, and on Saturday our church was opened as a coffee shop. And we had a succession of prisoners, one at a time, helping in the kitchen at the church. They would be with us for about a year, and then they'd be released. During that time, we were able to show them the love of Christ. One of the men that we built a relationship with reoffended not long after he was released, very fast. And the church went through a long period of prayer and discernment. Should we continue with this ministry? Isn't it just too dangerous? Finally, we decided to carry on spreading seeds, knowing that sometimes those seeds would not take root. We're called to take risks. Spreading seeds or God's love is not always successful. It's risky. The willingness to make mistakes, to waste time and energy, is a necessary part of the process. We need to do it anyway. If we don't sow seeds, then there's no chance of them taking root. If we want to be a church that truly welcomes diversity, shares with the poor and liberates the oppressed, then we need to take risks and try new things. We need to talk about difficult topics, let go of some things, embrace others, to use everyone's gifts, and not to pass judgment on who is what type of soil, and on the soil that we're sowing in. You did that here when we had those difficult conversations around whether to become a reconciling congregation and truly welcome all into your midst. And although we didn't officially send a contingent this year to the Sacramento Pride Parade last Sunday, I know that some of you were there, sowing more seeds. The parable of the sower has good news in it, a promise that we can claim. God sows everywhere and reaches us wherever we are. And when the seeds do manage to land on fertile soil, Jesus says the harvest is of miraculous proportion, 30, 60, 100-fold. Now there's a great children's book that I remember reading to my children when they were little. Maybe you've come across it. It's called Miss Rumphius by Barbara Cooney. The book tells the fictional story of a woman, Miss Alice Rumphius, who as a child visited her grandfather at his house by the sea, sat on his knee and listened to the stories of faraway places. And Alice would say, when I grow up, I too will go to faraway places, and when I grow old, I will live by the sea. Her grandfather told her that there was a third thing she must do. You must do something to make the world more beautiful. Well, Alice grew up, and eventually she did travel the world and retire to the sea. She never forgot her promise to her grandfather, though, to do something to make the world more beautiful. But she just couldn't figure out what to do. So one day she plants a few lupine seeds in a stony area in the garden of our house by the sea. And the next spring she's very surprised that from her bedroom window she can see lupines blooming in the stony ground. The following year, as she's out walking one day up and over the hill, she sees a large patch of lupines. The wind and the birds must have carried the seed, and that gives her a wonderful idea. She buys 5 bushels of lupine seed and then goes on long walks, scattering the seed everywhere she goes. Some people call her that crazy old lady. But the next spring, there are lupines everywhere. And each spring after that, there are more and more lupines. Now, Miss Rumphius is a very old lady, and they call her the Lupine Lady. She has a niece, also called Alice, to whom she tells stories of faraway places. And her niece says to her, when I grow up, I too will go to faraway places, and when I grow old, I'll live by the sea. And Miss Rumphius says to little Alice that there's a third thing she must do. You must do something to make the world more beautiful. So how do we become Miss Rumphius? Where are you going to plant lupines? Where are you going to plant seeds? What is Grass Valley going to look like? Because you're bearing fruit. Because together we're all bearing fruit. Every meal cooked at Hospitality House, every lunch made for Habitat for Humanity, every can of food given out by the Interfaith Food Ministry, every backpack purchased for a student, every diaper distributed to a parent in need, every Christmas gift purchased for a family escaping violence, every health kit assembled for emergency relief is a life changed, is a fruit, and is a part of the harvest. And this week, as I thought about that sower riskily throwing seed everywhere, I've been wondering about what we should be saying and doing about immigration and the separating of children from their parents. So I'm going to throw a few seeds out here right now, and I'm not sure where they're going to land. So I assume that you're all aware that recently the United States administration announced that it will begin separating families and criminally prosecuting all people who enter the United States without previous authorization, and that includes asylum seekers. On Friday, the Department of Homeland Security confirmed that 1,995 minors have been separated from April the 19th to May the 30th from their parents. And that doesn't include those taken in June. That's about 48 children a day. 2 an hour. 2 since we started worship. I've read reports of parents being told their children have just been taken for a bath and then they're not returned. Of a mother breastfeeding and having her baby ripped away from her. Of a separated 2-year-old in a facility having a meltdown and guards told that they cannot hold or comfort the child. Or siblings being told they can't hug each other. And pictures of cages. And proposals for tent cities. While it's hard to sort out which stories are true, there's no doubt in my mind that it is absolutely horrific. It's cruel and inhumane. We're violating human rights as defined by the United Nations, rights that we insist other countries obey. The American Psychological Association warned that separations threaten the mental and physical health of the children. Our own United Methodist Book of Discipline says in paragraph 162H, we oppose immigration policies that separate family members from each other or that include detention of families with children. And to make it worse, Attorney General Jeff Sessions is himself a United Methodist. And in the press report he did the other day, he was quoting from the Bible, specifically Romans 13, verse 1, section 1 through 7, verses that have long been used to justify Southern slavery, segregation, authoritarian rule in Nazi Germany, and South African apartheid. So 2 things I would encourage you to do. First, speak up. Sign any petitions you come across, alongside writing letters and making phone calls to our elected representatives, including our Congressman Doug LaMalfa, who I understand supports separating families. The second thing I'd encourage you to do is to make sure that you can argue back with those using Scripture. By taking isolated verses of Scripture, you can make the Bible say almost anything. Yes, Romans 13:1 says, let every person be subject to the governing authorities. But the verses in the previous chapter detail what love looks like. Let love be genuine. Hate what is evil, hold fast to what is good, love one another with mutual affection, outdo one another in showing honour, do not lag in zeal, be ardent in spirit, serve the Lord, extend hospitality to strangers. And then if you read a few verses after in Romans 13, verses 9 through 10, it says, the commandments are summed up in this word, love your neighbour as yourself. Love does no wrong to a neighbour, therefore love is the fulfilling of the law. John Wesley says, do no harm. In the Old Testament we're told time and time again to extend a hand to strangers. And Jesus reached out to outcasts. You know, we spend a lot of time on Thursday mornings talking about how we read and interpret Scripture with nuance and not always literally, so that it's a living word of liberation and not oppression. I want to encourage you to come to our Bible study so that you're able to talk confidently about your faith and scatter seeds of love in soils that are hard. The good news is that God is an indiscriminate sower. Our extravagantly wasteful sower God never gives up on us. God calls us to take risks and be equally generous in mission. Ultimately, against the odds, God's seed bears fruit. We have the promise of abundant, fruitful lives. A tiny seed can take root and bear great fruit. So let me ask you this morning, what seeds do each of you have? Are you guarding them or being generous? Are we as a church scattering seeds indiscriminately around Lake of the Pines, Outer Sierra and Grass Valley? When I decided upon the title of today's sermon, I also remembered a poem that is often attributed to Mother Teresa and hung on the wall of her children's home in Calcutta. The original poem is called The Paradoxical Commandments. It was written by Ken Keith. but I want to finish with Mother Teresa's version this morning. It's called Anyway. People are often unreasonable, illogical, and self-centered. Forgive them anyway. If you're kind, people may accuse you of selfish, ulterior motives. Be kind anyway. If you're successful, you will win some false friends and some true enemies. Succeed anyway. If you're honest and frank, people may cheat you. Be honest and frank anyway. When you spend years building, someone could destroy overnight. Build anyway. If you find serenity and happiness, they may be jealous. Be happy anyway. The good you do today people will often forget tomorrow. Do good anyway. Give the world the best you have, and it may never be enough. Give the world the best you've got anyway. You see, in the final analysis, it's between you and your God. It was never between you and them anyway. So let's not worry about where we sow, and however crazy it seems, let's just do it anyway. Thanks be to God. Amen. Let us pray together. Lord of the harvest, teach us to be reckless sowers, scattering the seeds of the gospel in the most unlikely places. Fill us with the spirit and joy of wasteful generosity. Enable us to be a church that is together, making the world more beautiful. May we lay claim to your promise that the harvest is great.